Well, I volunteered to give a lecture today on superhuman sports. Superhuman sports is basically part of my research, part of my interest in sports and human augmentation. And what I will do in this presentation is basically talk a bit about where it comes from, why I'm interested in that, what I've done so far, and what I would like to do in the future. So for me, one of the motivations before really explaining what superhuman sports is some observations. Sports in general, well, the history of sport goes back several thousands of years. So I don't know, at some point of time, it started as a preparation for war or training as a hunter. There were a lot of competitions, one-on-one competitions. So wrestling was also one of the first sports that really emerged, throwing things, I don't know, stone, axes, spears, these kind of things. But since then, sports have changed and different sports have emerged. And in fact, if somebody I think nowadays is really interested into sports, he or she will find a sport that really, yeah, just fits to the personal needs and interests of this person. Still, there has been, I'm not sure about the year, but there has been a recent study by the World Health Organizations, and they basically found out that only, well, 23% of adults are not physically active enough. And that this not being physically active enough is one of the major reasons for death worldwide. So being more active, motivating people to move, and being physically active can really contribute to, well, the health of our society, physical health of our society. And that's one of the motivations that I have to look into sports and how we can make sports more interesting. If you then at the same time look at what interests people, and specifically also interests people that are not that physically active, well, digital entertainment games are one of the most popular leisure activity around the world. And only a small portion of the games really require physical activity. I think, well, it started with the Nintendo Wii. Well, we still have it here at home, not installed, but I considered installing the Nintendo Wii back again because I really enjoyed playing tennis or doing the boxing game or play bowling. These kind of things was really fun. Similarly, there has been a lot of research activity on so-called exergames or exertion games, started by Floyd Muller, who's now in Australia at Monash University. And there has been a lot of research also on exertion games, on whether they can be used to promote well-being. So they have been used in elderly homes to bring people together for social well-being, but also for being physically active. But also they have been used for motivating children to play, or being more physically active and creating new sports and new forms of activities. However, there have also been studies that have shown that this motivation is only of temporary nature. So there are a lot of exergames have been developed. People start playing, say like, oh, I'm really engaged, I really like that, but then it stops. So there is an open question on how these games could be designed so that they are more sustainable, live longer, and really engage people over a longer period of time. And my interest goes a bit beyond exertion games. So superhuman sports definitely are also exertion games. But the idea here is to tap into the imagination of superpowers. So can you use human augmentation to make people believe they have superpowers and can do new things? So can you use digital technology for human augmentation to augment senses, to augment the body and augment the playing field in such a way that new sports become possible? I always use the example of Harry Potter's Quidditch. So, and I suggest that everyone who is really interested into the Harry Potter world and into Quidditch just goes to YouTube and searches for World Championship in Quidditch, and you will find the hilarious movies where people play Quidditch on a playing field with a broomstick between their legs, and then they run around. And the question is, I think the people already believe that they are playing Quidditch, but can we use digital technology to make people believe even more that they are playing Quidditch and give them, for example, the idea that they're really flying on a blue broomstick in a stadium? So that would, for me, become a superhuman sport. So when it actually started for me to investigate superhuman sports and what can be done with superhuman sports, that was during an IEEE an ISMAC conference in Fukuoka, Japan. And one of the keynote speakers there was Masahiko Inami, and he gave a lecture on superhuman powers and his drive to use digital technology to create superhuman powers or give people superhuman powers. And he was one of the founding members of the Superhuman Sports Society, which has been founded in Japan. And they had actually the plan to have a superhuman sports competition next to the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. Well, we all know that this, unfortunately, for the moment has not worked out, but we never know, well, what might happen next year. But this is basically a promotional video of the Superhuman Sports Society. Well, this movie showed a lot of examples, and I discussed a lot with Masahiko, and then we basically teamed up to have a yearly superhuman sports design competition. And well, the first of this superhuman sports design competition was in Delft in 2018. Unfortunately, last year it didn't work out for some reasons, but still there's a huge interest to keep this idea of superhuman sports going. And what my personal interest is actually is how you can use mixed reality games, or how you can use digital technology and human augmentation to motivate and engage humans in physical activity. And my approach to this and to answer this question is basically to look into possibilities on how to augment human capabilities in sports and games, and how this human augmentation can be used to make games more engaging. And for that purpose, I've looked into several models for engagement in games. And I've started to also identify design guidelines on how to design superhuman sports that are engaging. And together with Kai Kunze, he's at the moment at the Keio University in Japan. We wrote a few articles on superhuman sports, and we basically distinguished three means or ways of augmenting sports and games that I would like to discuss right now. So one is on augmenting the senses, one is augmenting the playing field, and another one is on augmenting the body. And during this superhuman sports design competition in Delft, we basically had 10 teams from all over the world that basically fitted into all these three categories. And I show you some examples of those. And I will specifically focus on augmenting the playing field, because this is where I worked with a lot of student teams in Delft. So if you think about augmenting the senses, the idea of creating a superhuman sport that augments the senses is basically to let the player perceive something that a normal person cannot perceive. So you can add, for example, a spider sense, that you can detect that a co-player is, for example, in danger. You could think about X-ray vision. And then this could be like you're playing in a labyrinth and you can look through a wall, or you can also think about clairvoyance that allows you to look into the future. Kai especially looked into possibilities on how to map the invisible play world onto existing senses, and there will be example, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. But the major idea is to really use digital technology for sensory augmentation, substitution, and supplementation. So you really would like to add new capabilities to the human and use it to create games. And one of the games that was presented in Delft was called Dubhead. And in that game, you basically were wearing gloves and you had a head-mounted display. And the moment that you were basically closing your eyes, so there was an eye tracking mechanism in the head-mounted display, you could perceive things in your environment with the gloves because they were heating up, for example, and then you could find power-ups, for example, that you then could use in the game after on. So basically, he used this sensory substitution by closing your eyes. You get rid of one sense, but you get a new one, and that's basically within the glove. Another example is the virtual super leap. Yeah, so the team around Masahiko, they created basically the idea that you use a head-mounted display and then you jump and you hold this drone stick, and the moment you jump, it pulls you up and gives you, well, the idea or that you are flying or jump further than you actually are really doing. Augmenting the body is, well, using augmentation or human augmentation to, yeah, to provide a, how to say, a natural extension of the body, give the body either yeah, an extra limb or technology to perceive things or differently or do things differently. So on the right, you see a picture of me and Kai playing Muscle Blazer or wearing the Muscle Blazer vests. And this Muscle Blazer Superhuman Sport was actually like a laser tagging game. But when you were shot, this vest that you were wearing could basically contract and make your movements or yeah, limit your movements. So the more you were shot, actually, the more difficult it was for you to move. So you could really feel the impact. Other examples that this one I tried out myself in Brisbane last year during ZigGraph Asia. It's basically, it's called Meta Arms, and it gives you 2 additional arms that you can control with your feet. It takes some time to really get an idea of how you can really control that, but then in the end you have 4 arms and you can basically do new things. You could think about new superhuman sports that become possible using this technology. So far the team, well, they haven't used it for superhuman sports. They more use it as really as a body augmentation or extension. So the arms could, for example, help you to open a door while you are carrying something really heavy, something like that. Or it can support you carrying something really heavy because you have 2 more arms. That one, the prosthetic tail, also a really nice project, but gives you the idea of having a tail, and then you can basically, can I see, I can't even, can I move that? Yeah. So you're within the game environment, you have this tail, and then they studied whether this tail gives you more balance, for example, a better perception of balance, or it gives you the idea that you're really a dinosaur. Again, these kind of technologies could be combined with applied immersive games to augment your body, give you additional capabilities, and give you new impressions of what is possible, of how it feels to be like a superhuman. That doesn't work. Okay. As I said before, I mainly worked, where is it, on augmenting the playing field, and that uses then in most cases visual augmentation of the playing field to add additional virtual elements that humans can interact with. What you can do by augmenting the playing field is you can basically create new sports. You can challenge the physics, you can add new equipment, you can add new opponents. On the right side, you see a picture of the winner of the Superhuman Sports Design competition in Delft. They basically created a climbing wall, and you could climb on that wall in virtual reality. And at the moment you basically were putting on the head-mounted display, you were walking across a plank, and there was, yeah, left and right to the plank. It was already quite deep, immediately quite deep. And they used it for the whole system. They used for helping people to overcome their fear of height, but also to train people in climbing. They even extended the system later on, and I tried that, I think, last year, just before we moved to New Zealand again, and they had a climbing treadmill. And then you were not in the mountains, but you were in a factory hall, and you could basically climb up the factory wall all the time. It was really incredible, very good synchronization and tracking. And I remember that they told me the moment I started climbing on that wall, they said like, oh, whatever happens, the moment you want to stop, there's always a red button next to you, and you can press the red button, and then there will be a platform. And this platform is ground level, so this platform is safe. And I said like, yeah, but I'm just here on a treadmill, and this treadmill or the climbing wall, that was just at max 2 meter high. So what could happen? But I think I was on there for 10, 15 minutes. And what I found really impressive is like the physical exertion that came with the visual impression of being really high up in the factory hall. Well, let me press the red button in the end. So I think you can really achieve novel things in combining human augmentation, using digital technology, and making people believe that they, yeah, do different and new sports. Yeah. One of the projects one of my students in Delft worked first on was called Play Your Run. And she herself, she was a runner. She had a lot of friends running, but she always struggled in finding the motivation to run and finding a running partner. And she basically designed this mock-up of a game, Play Your Run. And she tested it not with the digital augmentation that you will see in a minute, but she tested it with several people in a gym hall, and basically used mock-ups to resemble the idea in this movie. And she could indeed see that people were more motivated and showed more physical activity than before. But I first show the movie because it's really a nice one.
Find me a running partner. Hi, I'm Superhuman.
Hi, good luck.
I think the idea is pretty clear. So you are about to run, but you don't want to run alone. So you get a virtual partner, and you're not competing on time in this case, but you're competing on the virtual time and virtual distance. And it's somehow it's a combination of running and, for all the people who know Mario Kart. So you can run and you find power-ups. Well, or you can slow your opponent down by using the power-ups. You can have speed-up fields. And I think while we all know that that technology at the moment is not really there to make this possible. Marty and I looked into ways back then already if you could bring the game on a smartwatch. And I think, well, it would be possible and you could give basically the feedback in a different way. And it would be really nice to explore. Well, it's obvious who won.
Thanks. Good grade.
Let's see. So that was one of the examples. And as I said before, she did experiments and could really see that people were showing more activity. So she was basically replacing the power-ups that you have seen just now with balloons, and then you had to touch the balloons and then you got a power-up, and she took time. Well, there were some chat contributions, so I just can't any question? Take my, oh, okay, yeah. Another example is this one, League of Lasers. I take, before the movie starts, let me say something about that. It was a student team in Delft who developed it, and they used the Microsoft HoloLens for teams to play against each other. And we also showed that at the Delft Superhuman Sports Design Competition. And I have to say it was, well, second best, so it had an honorable mention because people who were coming into this design competition, they could try out all the different superhuman sports. And that one was one of the sports that really people put on the HoloLens and they were just immediately in and were playing. And it's basically a combination of, yeah, augmented reality and the all-time favorite game Pong in 3D. And the idea is that you as a player, you wear the HoloLens, and the HoloLens is basically your mirror. And with that mirror, you can reflect a laser beam in such a way that you hit the goal of your opponent. And what this team did for the first time is like to also think about the audience of a superhuman sport. Because if you just see people playing with the Microsoft HoloLens against each other, it looks really weird because you don't know what they are doing. But they basically projected the status of the game and the gameplay on a really large screen in a top-down view. And so they could basically see what was going on. And I start the movie now for I think the moment you look at how these two guys run around with the HoloLens, you understand what I was saying. Like, you really need to explain to the audience what is going on because it really looks hilarious, and you just don't know what's happening there and why people are doing that. What we could observe, though, the moment people were playing this, they really were in a different world and immediately chasing this laser beam. So sometimes I was really scared that I would not get my equipment back in one piece because they were just like forgetting about wearing this Microsoft HoloLens and were just running around. That was really, well, interesting to observe. Though this game as such is really simple. So there's a very basic interaction, but this basic interaction immediately triggers you to move and be active. A different one, and I think that's almost the last example I would like to show, is called StarTech. Again, a student team in Delft, again using the Microsoft HoloLens. This time it focused a bit less on physical activity, but also like looking at bigger teams. And the idea here is something like capture the flag, but in a space scenario. So you basically have to capture planets, and for capturing planets, you need to have a certain amount of energy that you need to deplete the moment you are close to the planet. And the moment your team has more planets than the opposing team, or more than 50%, well, basically you have won. The idea was to actually, and the game was also designed in such a way to play it in teams of 10 people against 10 other people. Unfortunately, because we never had so many HoloLens at our hand, we could never try that. But the idea was really to have larger teams and then also allow for more strategic decisions and team coordination while being physically active. And in the movie, you will basically see only 2 players playing against each other in a small room. And you will also see that the audience basically could participate in the game. So not only watch the game on a large screen, but they could, for example, by clapping and cheering, they could support a team and give the team additional energy to capture planets. Okay. Oh, there's no sound. Is there no sound? There should be sound. Okay, seem to have a sound issue, but what you actually can see is in the bottom, you see the view for the audience, and you can see where the players are and which planets they have already captured. You can see how much energy each team has. And in the upper right corner, you see the blue team. And in the upper left corner, you see the actions of the red team. And you have to carefully consider, as a player of that game, to which planet you move next, where you collect the energy. So you can basically collect energy from planets that have not been captured yet, or collect energy from your own planets. But the moment you do this, you reduce the amount of energy that is stored on the planet, and it becomes easier for the other team to overtake the planet. So you always have to be aware of your surrounding. You have to be aware of which planets you already have and the energy levels. And it would have been a really nice game for being played in a team. Okay, I think you got the idea here. And as a final example, most of you will already know that Wizards, that's the game Mike has developed while he was an intern in our lab beginning of the year. And it uses the Magic Leap, and it's resembles a bit the dueling in Harry Potter. So you are a wizard, you have your magic wand, and you can shoot at another wizard and have a battle. You can raise a shield to basically deflect spells cast at you, and you need to run around to collect these blue gems to have enough energy or mana to be able to perform magic. And this blue sphere is basically your home sphere. The moment you're dead, you need to go there to recharge or respawn. And what you will see in one of so basically here, the moment you're dead, you turn white, you go back to your sphere, and then you respawn, and then you can start a new game again. What we have added, though, and it's very difficult to see in that movie, but for a second, there it is. There's the golden snitch. You can end the game by either defeating your opponent or by catching the golden snitch. And the golden snitch is controlled by the audience again. So you can have the audience participate in the gameplay and help a team or make it more difficult for a team by controlling the snitch and letting the snitch fly around on the playing field. And I think this is one of the unique opportunities that you have for Superhuman Sports, is indeed bringing in the audience and giving the audience a way to participate in the sports and the game as well. Okay. And as a final example, and that goes a bit away from superhuman sports, but in a direction of more augmenting sports and making sports perhaps more interesting, more safe, and allowing athletes to perform better. This is basically a mock-up from a project that started just before we left called Citius Altius Sanius, which is Latin for better, higher, safer. And that was a large project that basically looked in all kinds of sports and using technology to making sports or athletes perform better in a safer way. And we specifically looked into cycling. And this is a movie one of my PhD students recorded with a Garmin work that we have in our lab as well. And then he used all the sender data that was captured to create a mock-up movie of me cycling a tour around the Delft campus. So just to give you an idea, enjoy. I think the movie doesn't have sound, so we'll talk about what I'm doing there. So I'm putting on whatever the camera, and then I go cycling. And what we wanted to do here is basically to think about how you can give feedback to cyclists to perform better and safer. So could you basically show data while you are cycling in such a way that you can use your performance or your power in a better way? And we specifically work with the team Sunweb, which is an elite cyclist team in the Netherlands. And we looked into ways of having cyclists adhere better to a pacing plan that they need to adhere to during time trials. We published a paper that will be, I think, out there around June on first results, where we basically used human augmentation to have or to give cyclists feedback on how well they adhere to their cycling plan. And we could show that the adherence to a pacing plan is better with a digital feedback mechanism that we have devised. Not the one that you're seeing in this movie, because technology is not there yet, but a similar one where this augmentation and the feedback is shown on the mobile phone that is mounted on the handlebar. Yeah. And the student there, he's currently looking into an eye tracking study to really think about where to put visual feedback. Where do cyclists look while they are cycling, and where this information needs to be displayed. Okay. Okay. So I think I started with saying, like, okay, superhuman sports, they could be a way to really motivate people and to engage people into physical activity. And over the last years, there have been several models on engagement and game engagement. This is one more general model on user engagement with digital technology in general. And it's a very simple model. It just says at some point of time, there's a point of engagement, then people are engaged, and several attributes contribute to being engaged, staying engaged, or at some point of time disengaged. And the moment you're disengaged, the same attributes basically can ensure that you are re-engaged or re-engaging with the digital technology at some point of time. And if you look at the attributes, well, you have things like novelty, interest, motivation that can trigger your motivation to start your engagement with a game. While you're in the game, well, challenges, the feedback that you get, your interest, the positive effect can keep you engaged. But attributes that can basically lead to a disengagement could be, well, the usability, the challenges are too hard or too simple, negative effect. So this is basically just a very simple model that shows how you start a game and start being engaged. And the moment I was looking at superhuman sports, what I could see, especially during the design competition that we had, the people that were coming in, they were all engaged with the new sports. With some, they were more engaged, with some, they were less engaged, but generally they liked being active and using the technology. And I started the presentation by saying, like, oh, we actually do not know whether this engagement is just based on curiosity, the novelty, or whether one of these games could really persist and be sustainable and keep people engaged. And that's basically something I would like to look into, on whether you can design games in such a way that people keep their engagement and stay physically active and are not just triggered by an initial curiosity, oh, how is it to play a game with a HoloLens? And another model that comes into play there is this game engagement model, which is basically a combination of an early paper by Brown and Kearns on the 3 levels of engagement being immersion, involvement, and presence, and the flow theory by Michael Csikszentmihalyi. And they basically say at some point of time, you need to focus your attention to start being engaged with the game, start being immersed in a game. The more you're immersed, the more you're involved. And then you move from a low level engagement to a high level engagement. If you read this paper by Prof and others, oh, interesting, started theory. You will notice that their model is very much focused on the graphics a game offers rather than really on the mechanics in the game. And compared to the model before, they completely leave out the question of re-engagement. And I'm currently looking into ways of combining this engagement model and creating a new engagement model, and then test this new engagement model within Superhuman sports and to see whether that really works. So it brings me basically to my last slide as conclusions. Superhuman sports in general augment the senses, augment the body, augment the playing field. What I've seen so far is that they encourage physical activity, but it's unclear whether that is really sustainable. What I've seen as well is that they allow for new sport experiences and that they enable safe training, which are very interesting fields to explore. Specifically with the game League of Lasers, the one with the 3D Pong, it became obvious that with the current hardware technology, the simpler you can keep it, the more you can achieve, because it's easy to understand, easy to start. So the entry level is really low. And so what I would like to work on in the future, I said that already, is to really look into a model for engagement in physical activities and looking more into these superhuman sport and physical activities in order to identify design guidelines that can help future designers of superhuman sports. Well, that was basically what I wanted to talk to you about for today.